The crystal bridge trembled beneath Marcus. Shun's boots as another energy. Storm swept across the floating islands of Ethros Prime. Purple lightning crackled between the suspended landmasses, illuminating the abandoned mining structures that clung to their undersides like metal parasites. He pressed himself against the translucent barrier of his portable shield generator, watching the electrical display paint the perpetual twilight in violent hues. Somewhere out there among these drifting monuments to corporate greed was the woman who had given him a second chance at life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus adjusted the bioscanner clipped to his belt. Its soft blue glow barely visible against the ambient energy signatures that saturated this sector. 3 months of following leads, bribing information brokers, and tracking energy patterns had brought him to the Shattered Rim, where the most desperate and dangerous made their homes among the unstable crystal formations. The scanner had detected traces of Vel'nathi bioenergy 2 days ago, faint but unmistakable. After 18 months of searching, he was finally close. The storm began to subside, and Marcus continued across the bridge, his magnetic boots finding purchase on the crystal metal composite. Below him, a chasm of swirling energy mist stretched down into darkness, while above, the next island loomed. Like a wounded giant. Chunks of raw crystal jutted from its surface, some still glowing with residual power from the mining operations that had carved them apart years ago. The corporation that had built this place was long gone, but their scars remained. Marcus remembered the first time he had seen a Vel'nathi. It was during the early days of human expansion, when first contact protocols were still being written in blood and misunderstanding. Lyra had been part of a diplomatic envoy, her bioluminescent markings shifting from blue to gold as she translated between her people and the human negotiators. Even then, before he knew her name or understood what she would mean to him, Marcus had been struck by the way she carried herself with quiet dignity, despite the obvious tension in the room. That was before the war, before her homeworld burned, before she saved his life and disappeared into the void. The scanner chirped softly, and Marcus quickened his pace. The signal was stronger now, coming from a cluster of abandoned habitation pods near the island's edge. These structures had once housed mining crews, but now they hung empty and dark, connected by a web of maintenance tunnels that burrowed deep into the crystal core. It was exactly the kind of place someone would choose if they wanted to remain hidden from the rest of the galaxy. Marcus reached the first pod and peered through its viewport. Empty. The second showed signs of recent habitation, discarded food containers and a makeshift sleeping area, but whoever had been there was gone. The third pod's airlock had been sealed from the inside, and his scanner was practically singing with Vel'nathi energy signatures. He pressed his palm against the airlock control, and his suit's translation software activated. In the flowing script of the Vel'nathi language, he typed a message onto the display panel. "Lyra, it's Marcus. I know you're in there. We need to talk." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the bioluminescent patterns in his suit's sleeve began to glow, responding to energy that was seeping through the pod's hull. Vel'nathi communication was as much about emotional resonance as it was about words, and Marcus could feel the mixture of surprise, anger, and something that might have been relief washing over him in waves. The airlock cycled, and Marcus stepped. Inside, she was thinner than he remembered, her silver-blue skin pale and drawn. The intricate bioluminescent markings that traced along her arms and neck flickered weakly, like candles in a dying breeze. Her large violet eyes regarded him with a mixture of wariness and exhaustion that made his chest tighten with concern. "You should not have come here," Lyra said, her voice carrying the melodic undertones that made Vel'nathi's speech sound like distant music. "This place is not safe for humans." Marcus removed his helmet and set it aside, never breaking eye contact. Nowhere has been safe since the corporation started hunting your people. That's why I've been looking for you." Lyra's markings flashed orange, a color Marcus recognized as distress. "Looking for me? Why would you waste your time on such foolishness? I am nothing. My people are scattered dust. My world is ash." "You're wrong," Marcus said, stepping closer. "You're the woman who reached into an energy storm with her bare hands to pull me back from the dead. You're the reason I'm standing here instead of floating in the void as another casualty of human arrogance." The memory hung between them like a bridge neither had crossed in too long. The mining accident on Kepler Station, when a crystal resonator had overloaded and flooded the lower levels with lethal energy. Marcus had been caught in the blast, his nervous system frying as exotic particles rewrote his cellular structure. From the inside out, the medics had given up, but Lyra had not. She had placed her hands on his chest and somehow drawn the poison from his body, channeling it into herself and dispersing it harmlessly into the station's power grid. "That was different," Lyra whispered, but her markings had shifted to a softer blue. "Then I had purpose. Then I had hope." Marcus reached into his pack and pulled out a small device, no larger than his palm. It was crystal technology, but unlike anything the mining corporations had ever produced. The surface was smooth and warm, pulsing with a gentle inner light that seemed to respond to the rhythm of his heartbeat. "I've been learning," he said, "about your people, your culture, your technology. I know what this place used to mean to the Vel'nathi before the miners came. I know what it could mean again." Lyra stared at the device, and for the first time since he had entered the pod, her expression softened. "Where did you find that?" "I made it," Marcus replied. "It took me 6 months and half my savings, but I learned how to grow crystal matrices. The way your people taught humans before everything went wrong. It's not perfect, but it works." Before Lyra could respond, an alarm began wailing from somewhere deeper in the pod. Her markings immediately shifted to deep red, the color of danger and fear. Outside the viewport, Marcus could see lights moving in the distance, the unmistakable glow of corporate raider ships approaching through the energy mist. "They found us," Lyra breathed, and in that moment, Marcus understood that their reunion was about to become something much more dangerous than either of them had anticipated. The raider ships moved through the energy mist like predators stalking wounded prey, their hulls gleaming with the telltale modifications that marked them as corporate hunters. Marcus counted at least 3 vessels, their scanning arrays already, sweeping the abandoned mining complex with methodical precision. These weren't opportunistic scavengers looking for salvage. They were here for something specific. Lyra moved to the pod's control console with fluid grace, her fingers dancing across the crystal interface as data streams flowed across the display in Vel'nathi script. The bioluminescent patterns along her arms pulsed in rapid sequences, and Marcus realized she was communing directly with the pod's systems in a way that human technology could never replicate. "Zeth's consortium," she said, her voice tight with controlled fear. "They have been hunting the Outer Rim settlements for weeks, taking any Vel'nathi they can find. The survivors who escape speak of research facilities, of experiments." Marcus felt his jaw clench. The consortium was one of the most ruthless corporate entities operating in the frontier sectors, known for pushing the boundaries of what civilized worlds considered acceptable. If they were capturing Vel'nathi, it wasn't. For humanitarian purposes, how long do we have?
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
He asked, checking his suit's power levels and weapon systems. Lyra's markings shifted to deep amber, the color of uncertainty. Their sensors are sophisticated, but the crystal formations here create interference. Perhaps 10 minutes before they isolate our exact location. The pod shuddered as something heavy impacted the island's surface above them. Through the viewport, Marcus could see armed figures rappelling down from the nearest raider ship, their movements coordinated and professional. These weren't common pirates. They were military contractors, equipped with the kind of gear that suggested serious corporate backing. "We need to move," Marcus said, reaching for his helmet. "I know these tunnels. There's a maintenance shaft that leads to the old processing facility on the next island." Lyra's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger. "You think I am helpless? That I need you to rescue me like some damaged creature?" The bitterness in her voice caught Marcus off guard. He had expected fear, maybe even gratitude, but not this wall of defensive hostility. "That's not what I meant. I just thought—" "You thought wrong," Lyra interrupted, her markings now blazing with indignant orange. "I have survived 18 months in this wasteland without help from anyone. I do not need a human savior driven by guilt to complicate my existence further." Marcus stared at her, seeing clearly for the first time the depth of the wounds she carried. This wasn't just grief over her lost homeworld. This was something deeper, a fundamental breach in her ability to trust or connect with others. The woman who had once served as a bridge between species had become an island unto herself. "You're right," he said quietly. "You don't need saving. But those raiders up there aren't going to give you a choice in the matter." As if summoned by his words, the pod's hull began to vibrate with the deep thrumming of cutting tools. The raiders had found them, and they were coming in. Lyra moved to a storage alcove and withdrew a weapon that made Marcus's breath catch. It was Vel'nathi crystal tech, but unlike anything he had seen before. The device resembled a staff topped with a cluster of raw energy crystals, each one pulsing with contained power. When she gripped it, the crystals resonated with her bioluminescent markings, creating a harmony of light and energy that was both beautiful and terrifying. "The tunnel you mentioned," she said, her tone now all business. "Where does it lead?" Marcus activated his suit's tactical display, projecting a three-dimensional map of the mining complex into the air between them. "Here," he said, highlighting a path that wound through the island's core. "It comes out near the old smelting facility. From there we can reach the transport platform." "And then?" Lyra asked, even as the cutting sounds above them grew more intense. "Then we figure out how to get off this rock before they bring in reinforcements." The pod's ceiling began to glow red-hot as the raiders' tools broke through the outer hull. Sparks rained down, and the air filled with the acrid smell of melting metal. Marcus grabbed his pack and moved toward the pod's rear exit, but stopped when he realized Lyra wasn't following. She stood motionless in the center of the small chamber, her crystal staff held vertically before her like a beacon. The weapon's energy output was increasing, and the temperature in the pod was rising. Noticeably, her bioluminescent patterns had shifted to a color Marcus had never seen before, a deep violet that seemed to pulse with barely contained fury. "Lyra, we need to go. Now." "They killed my brother," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Zeth's people. They took him from a refugee camp on Epsilon Reach 3 weeks ago. The survivors said he fought them, tried to protect the younglings who could not defend themselves." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Lyra, they will not take me," she continued, and now her markings were shifting through multiple colors in rapid succession, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. "And they will not leave here to hunt others." The cutting tools broke through the ceiling with a shower of metal fragments, and the first raider dropped into the pod. He was fully armored, his face hidden behind a tactical visor, but Marcus could see the corporate insignia on his shoulder plates. The man raised his weapon, some kind of neural disruptor designed to incapacitate rather than kill. Lyra moved faster than human eyes could follow. The crystal staff swept in a wide arc, and energy erupted from its tip in a brilliant wave that filled the pod with blinding light. The raider's weapon dissolved in his hands, reduced to its component atoms by forces that rewrote matter at the molecular level. The man himself stumbled backward, his armor systems failing as the energy pulse overloaded every piece of technology he carried. "Move," Lyra commanded, and Marcus didn't argue. They plunged through the pod's rear exit into the maintenance tunnel beyond, Lyra's crystal staff providing the only illumination as they navigated the narrow passage. Behind them, Marcus could hear shouting and the distinctive whine of energy weapons charging up. The raiders were regrouping, and they would be coming fast. The tunnel branched in multiple directions, a maze of service corridors that had once allowed maintenance crews to access every part of the mining complex. Marcus led the way, following his suit's navigation system and trying to ignore the way the walls seemed to pulse with residual energy from Lyra's weapon discharge. "You could have killed him," Marcus said as they reached a junction point. "Yes," Lyra replied without hesitation. "I chose not to. That restraint is becoming more difficult to maintain." They emerged from the tunnels onto a platform overlooking the processing facility, a vast chamber filled with the skeletal remains of industrial equipment. The space was dark except for the faint glow of crystal formations in the walls, but Marcus's suit sensors painted a detailed picture of their surroundings. Multiple entry points, limited cover, and nowhere to run if the raiders cornered them here. "This is not a defensible position," Lyra observed, scanning the chamber with eyes that could perceive energy patterns invisible to humans. "It's not meant to be," Marcus replied, activating a control sequence on his suit. "It's meant to be a distraction." The facility's emergency lighting system came online, flooding the chamber with harsh white illumination. At the same time, Marcus triggered every alarm and proximity sensor in the complex, creating a cacophony of noise that would mask their true movements. It was an old soldier's trick, one that Captain Torres had taught him during his military service years ago. "The transport platform is on the far side," Marcus said, pointing across the chamber. "We move fast, stay low, and hope they take the bait." Lyra nodded, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her markings continued to pulse with colors that spoke of barely contained violence. She was holding herself together through sheer force of will, but something inside her was breaking down, and he wasn't sure how much longer her self-control would last. They sprinted across the facility floor, weaving between massive pieces of abandoned machinery while the alarms continued to wail around them. Above, Marcus could hear the distinctive sound of raider dropships moving into position, their pilots trying to track the source of the disturbance through the interference created by the crystal formations. They were halfway to the platform when the first energy bolt seared past Marcus's head, leaving a trail of ionized air that made his suit's sensors scream warnings. The raiders had found them, and they were no longer interested in taking prisoners. The silence that followed Marcus's words stretched between them like a chasm, broken only by the distant hum of the facility's failing power systems and the occasional crackle from overloaded crystal formations. Lyra stood motionless, her staff dark and cold in her hands, while somewhere above them, the retreating raiders' ships prepared for departure. The confrontation was over, but Marcus could sense that something more important was just beginning. "Hope," Lyra repeated the word as if tasting something bitter. "Do you know what hope cost my people? We hoped the consortium would honor the territorial agreements. We hoped the mining operations would remain in the dead zones, away from our sacred groves. We hoped that when the first shots were fired, reason would prevail over profit." She moved to one of the facility's viewing ports, gazing out at the energy storms that perpetually raged between the floating islands. Her reflection in the crystal steel composite showed a figure that seemed carved from shadow and starlight, beautiful and remote as a distant constellation. "Hope was the weapon they used against us more effectively than any plasma cannon," she continued. "Every time we considered striking first, stopping them before they could establish their foothold, Hope whispered that diplomatic solutions were still possible. Hope kept us passive until it was too late to matter." Marcus approached slowly, his footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. The facility around them bore the scars of corporate extraction, great wounds carved into crystal formations that had taken millennia to grow. It was a monument to the kind of thinking that saw resources where others saw sacred spaces, profit where others saw home. The woman I met on Kepler Station didn't believe in passive solutions, he said. She walked into an energy storm to save a human she barely knew. That wasn't hope talking. That was courage. Lyra's markings flickered, a brief pulse of blue that faded almost immediately. Courage and stupidity are often indistinguishable until after the consequences are measured. I saved one human and doomed my world. What do you mean? She turned from the viewport, and Marcus saw something in her expression that made his chest tighten with understanding. The energy I channeled. That day, the power I used to heal you, it came from the heart crystal of Vel'nathi. Every time one of my people uses our abilities off-world, we weaken the planetary defense grid. The consortium knew this. They counted on it. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. The guilt he had carried for 18 months, the debt he felt he owed her, was nothing compared to the burden she had shouldered. She believed she had traded her homeworld for his life, and that belief had been eating her alive ever since. The defense grid fell because someone betrayed the access codes, Marcus said firmly. You told me that yourself. One person's treachery, not your sacrifice. The betrayal merely opened the door, Lyra replied. But the grid was already weakened by hundreds of small acts of compassion, moments when my people chose to help others, instead of preserving our strength. Every refugee we healed, every alliance we honored, every time we reached out to touch another mind in friendship, we gave away pieces of our protection. Marcus felt something click into place, a pattern he should have recognized earlier. That's why you isolated yourself here. You're not just hiding from the raiders. You're punishing yourself. Lyra's staff began to glow again, but softly this time, like candlelight rather than a weapon's glare. I am preventing further damage. Every connection I make, every bond I allow to form, diminishes what little power remains to my scattered people. Better to live alone than to be responsible for more death. That's not living, Marcus said. That's just a slower form of dying. He reached into his pack and withdrew the crystal device he had shown her earlier, its surface warm and pulsing with gentle bioluminescence. You asked where I got this. The truth is, I didn't just learn your crystal growing techniques. I learned why they matter. Lyra stared at the device, her markings shifting to colors Marcus couldn't interpret. Impossible. Humans lack the neural pathways necessary for true crystal communion. Most humans, yes, Marcus agreed. But the energy poisoning I suffered, the way you healed me, it changed something fundamental in my nervous system. Your doctors have a name for it: neural crystallization. It's why I can grow matrices that actually work instead of just pretty sculptures. He held the device toward her, and she recoiled as if he were offering her a live grenade. You cannot ask this of me. I will not touch another mind, will not risk creating another bridge that others might exploit. I'm not asking you to create anything, Marcus said gently. I'm asking you to see what's already there. Before she could protest further, he activated the device. Immediately, the crystal formations throughout the facility began to resonate, their harmonic frequency shifting to match the matrix in his hands. But this wasn't the violent communion Lyra had forced during the battle with the raiders. This was something else entirely, a gentle dialogue between organic consciousness and crystalline memory. Images began to form in the air around them, holographic projections drawn from the device's data core. Marcus watched Lyra's face as scenes from across the galaxy flickered to life before them. Vel'nathi refugees working alongside human engineers to build better shields for colony ships. Mixed crews exploring uncharted systems, their combined skills allowing them to survive dangers that would have destroyed either species alone. Children of both races playing together in settlement commons. their laughter carrying no trace of the ancient fears that divided their elders. 6 months, Marcus said as the images continued to cycle. That's how long I spent tracking down Vel'nathi survivors, not to capture them, but to learn from them. Every person I met had the same story. Your people didn't weaken the defense grid. Through compassion, you created something stronger. A network of alliances, of shared knowledge, of mutual protection that spans half the galaxy. Lyra's markings were cycling through rapid color changes now, her emotional state clearly visible. In the bioluminescent display. These cannot be real. The consortium would never allow such cooperation. The consortium doesn't know, Marcus replied. They see individual refugees, isolated survivors to be hunted or ignored. They don't see the connections, the way your people have been quietly rebuilding not just your civilization, but improving ours in the process. One final image appeared, and Marcus saw Lyra's breath catch. It was a crystal formation unlike any he had seen before, massive and beautiful, growing in the heart of a human space station. But this wasn't natural crystal growth. The matrix showed clear signs of deliberate cultivation, of hands that understood both the science and the art of crystal shaping. New Vel'nathi, Marcus said softly. That's what they're calling it. A joint human Vel'nathi research station in the Centauri Drift. 50 families so far, building something that never existed before. Not your old world restored, but a new world created. Lyra reached out tentatively, her fingers almost touching the holographic projection before pulling back. How many? Thousands, Marcus replied. Scattered across dozens of systems, but connected through networks like this one. Every act of compassion your people performed, every bridge you built with other species, created nodes in a web that the consortium can't see and can't break. The device in his hands pulsed brighter, and suddenly Marcus could feel it, the vast network of consciousness that linked Vel'nathi survivors across the galaxy. It was like stepping into a river of thought and emotion, countless individual minds touching and supporting each other across impossible distances. And at the center of it all, he sensed something that took his breath away. They're waiting. For you, he whispered, all of them. The network has a void at its heart where you should be, a silence where your voice should join the choir. Lyra's staff fell from nerveless fingers, clattering against the facility floor. Her markings were now cycling through every color in the spectrum, a rainbow cascade of emotions too complex for any single hue to contain. I cannot, she said, but her voice carried none of its earlier certainty. The risk is in staying isolated, Marcus interrupted. Every day you remain cut off from your people, the network grows more unstable. They need you, Lyra, not just your power, but your wisdom, your experience, your voice in the chorus of survival. He deactivated the device, and the images faded, leaving them alone in the facility's dim lighting. But something had changed in the space between them, a shift as subtle and profound as the moment when a crystal begins to form around a seed of possibility. Why? Lyra asked, and for the first time since he had found her, she sounded genuinely vulnerable. Why risk yourself to find me? Why spend months learning our ways, building bridges we never asked for? Marcus smiled, remembering another night long ago when a dying human and a compassionate alien had faced impossible odds together. Because someone once told me that understanding was possible between species as different as ours. I believed her then, and I believe her now. Lyra looked at him for a long moment, her markings settling into a steady blue that reminded him of deep water under starlight. Then slowly she reached for her fallen staff and stood. Show me, she said simply. Show me this network you claim exists. Marcus nodded and began to prepare the device for a deeper connection, one that would link Lyra not just to the stored memories in his crystal matrix, but to the living minds of her scattered people. It was a risk, he knew. Opening herself to that kind of contact after so long in isolation could overwhelm her, could shatter the careful walls she had built around her heart. But as he watched her steady herself for what was to come, Marcus realized that she had already made her choice. The woman who had once saved his life was finally ready to save herself. Marcus activated the crystal device with careful precision, watching as its internal matrix began to synchronize with the facility's dormant systems. The process was delicate, requiring exact harmonic frequencies to establish a stable connection across interstellar distances. One miscalculation could result in psychic feedback severe enough to permanently damage Lyra's neural pathways. Lyra stood before him, her staff planted firmly on the metal floor, her bioluminescent markings cycling through preparation patterns he recognized from his months of study. She was centering herself, drawing inward before she could reach outward, preparing for a communion that would either heal her isolation or confirm her worst fears about the cost of connection. "The initial contact will feel overwhelming," Marcus warned, fine-tuning the device's output parameters. 6 months of stored interactions compressed into a few minutes of sensory data. "Try not to resist the flow. I have communed with thee." "Heart crystal of Vel'nathi," Lyra replied, though he could hear the uncertainty beneath her confident words. "I have touched the living memory of my homeworld. This cannot be more intense than that experience." Marcus hoped she was right, but he suspected she was wrong. The heart crystal had been a single unified consciousness, vast but coherent. The network he was about to show her was something entirely different, a web of individual minds each carrying their own pain, hope, and determination to survive. The device reached optimal resonance, and Marcus felt the familiar sensation of his consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries of his physical form. For a human, the experience was like diving into an ocean of alien thought, overwhelming and beautiful in equal measure. For a Vel'nathi, it would be coming home after a long exile. "Now," he said, and Lyra placed her hand on the crystal matrix. The reaction was immediate and violent. Energy erupted from the point of contact, racing up Lyra's arm and spreading across her entire body in cascading waves of bioluminescence. Her markings blazed through color combinations Marcus had never seen before, patterns so complex they seemed to encode entire languages of emotion and memory. She gasped, her back arching as the first wave of contact hit her nervous system. Through their shared connection, Marcus felt an echo of what she was experiencing. Voices, thousands of them, calling out across the void in harmonies that spoke of loss and hope intertwined. The scattered children of Vel'nathi, reaching across impossible distances to touch minds with their lost sister. "Too much," Lyra whispered, her grip on the crystal device tightening until her knuckles showed white beneath her silver-blue skin. "I cannot process so many simultaneous connections." Marcus stepped closer, placing his hands over hers on the device. "Don't try to hear them all at once. Focus on individual voices, let the rest fade into background harmony." She nodded, her breathing ragged but stabilizing. Gradually, her markings settled into more manageable patterns, and Marcus could sense her consciousness learning to navigate the network's complexity. She was finding her place in the choir, adding her voice to the ancient songs of her people. The first clear contact came from someone calling themselves Chiron Vel'nathi, a crystal engineer working on the construction platforms of New Vel'nathi. Through the connection, Lyra experienced his memories of the past 18 months, the painstaking work of growing new crystal matrices in human-built foundries, the challenge of teaching human technicians to feel the resonance patterns that guided proper formation. "He is singing the growing songs," Lyra said, wonder filling her voice. "I thought they were lost when the archives burned." "Your people carried them in their minds," Marcus replied. "Every melody, every technical specification, every cultural tradition preserved in living memory and passed through the network." More contacts followed, each one a window into a different aspect of Vel'nathi's survival and adaptation. A medical technician on a frontier colony, using modified crystal therapy to treat diseases that conventional medicine couldn't touch. A diplomat working within the Confederation bureaucracy, quietly building support for refugee protection legislation. A teacher on a mixed-species transport, sharing Vel'nathi philosophy with human children who would grow up understanding both worlds. With each connection, Lyra's posture straightened, her confidence growing. But Marcus could sense something else building through their shared link. A growing awareness that made her markings shift toward deeper, more complex hues. "They are damaged," she said suddenly, her voice carrying new understanding. "All of them. The network you show me is not a restoration of what we were. It is something fundamentally different, shaped by trauma and adaptation." Marcus nodded, having expected this realization. The war changed everyone it touched. But that doesn't make what they've built less valuable. Sometimes things have to break before they can become something stronger. Lyra's consciousness touched another node in the network, and Marcus felt her emotional response spike with recognition. This contact was different, more personal, carrying resonance patterns that spoke of family bonds and shared childhood memories. "Thane," she breathed, her entire body trembling with the force of connection. "My brother, he lives." Through the link, Marcus experienced the reunion secondhand. The desperate joy of siblings who had believed each other dead, reaching across space to touch minds once more. Thane's memories flooded through the connection, showing his capture by consortium raiders, his imprisonment in research facilities where corporate scientists studied Vel'nathi abilities, and finally his escape during a coordinated rescue operation mounted by other network members. "He has been searching for me," Lyra said, tears of bioluminescent fluid tracking down her cheeks. "For months, he has sent queries through the network, hoping someone might have seen signs of my passage." The reunion was beautiful to witness, but Marcus could sense darker currents flowing beneath the surface joy. Thane's experiences in consortium custody had left scars that went deeper than physical damage. His captors had not merely studied him. They had tried to break him, to find ways of severing the connections that linked Vel'nathi consciousness to their crystal tech abilities. "They want to weaponize our gifts," Lyra said, her voice hardening as she absorbed her brother's traumatic memories. The experiments, the neural mapping, the attempts to duplicate our abilities in artificial systems. "The consortium is not merely hunting my people for profit. They are trying to steal the essence of what makes us who we are." Marcus felt his own anger building in response to what he was seeing through the connection. The clinical detachment of the researchers, the casual cruelty of the guards, the systematic attempt to reduce a sentient being to nothing more than a collection of useful biological functions. It was exactly the kind of dehumanizing approach that had made him leave military service in the first place. "How many others?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. Lyra's consciousness reached deeper into the network, following threads of connection that led to darker places. She found them scattered throughout consortium space. Vel'nathi prisoners held in research facilities disguised as mining operations, or medical centers. Each one was a node of suffering in the network, their pain shared among their people, but impossible to ease from such vast distances. "Dozens," Lyra said, her markings now pulsing with controlled fury. "Perhaps more in facilities we have not yet located. They are using our network against us, Marcus. Every connection we make to support each other also reveals our locations to their tracking systems." The realization hit them both simultaneously. The beautiful web of consciousness that linked Vel'nathi survivors across the galaxy was also a targeting system, allowing corporate hunters to map the population they sought to exploit. Every act of communion, every attempt to rebuild their shattered civilization, put them at greater risk of capture. "That's why you isolated yourself," Marcus said, understanding flooding through him. "You weren't just punishing yourself for your homeworld's destruction. You were protecting the network by removing yourself from it." Lyra nodded, her connection to the crystal device beginning to fluctuate as emotional overload threatened to sever the link entirely. Every day I remain apart, the network grows weaker, more unstable. But every day I rejoin it, I provide the consortium with another tracking reference, another way to hunt my people. There has to be another solution, Marcus said, his mind racing through possibilities. Some way to mask the connections, to protect the network while maintaining its benefits. Through their shared link, he felt Lyra's consciousness reaching toward something at the very edge of perception, a presence that seemed older and more powerful than any individual Vel'nathi mind. For a moment, he caught a glimpse of what she was touching, a vast intelligence that existed somehow between the network's connections rather than within any single node. The archive, Lyra whispered, her voice filled with awe. The collective memory of Vel'nathi, somehow preserved in the spaces between consciousness. It survived the planet's destruction by existing in the network itself. Marcus felt his understanding of Vel'nathi civilization expanding in ways that challenged everything he thought he knew about the relationship between technology and consciousness. The archive wasn't just a repository of information. It was a living entity, a gestalt consciousness born from the accumulated experiences of an entire species. And it was trying to communicate with them. The contact was brief but profound, knowledge flowing through the connection in patterns too complex for linear thought. Marcus caught fragments of concepts that would take years to fully understand, glimpses of possibilities that redefined what it meant for minds to touch across the void. When the communication ended, both he and Lyra were left gasping, their consciousness snapping back to their individual selves with jarring suddenness. The crystal device in their hands had gone dark, its matrix overloaded by forces beyond its design parameters. "Did you understand any of that?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse from the strain of contact. Lyra looked at him with eyes that held depths he was only beginning to fathom. "Enough," she said. "Enough to know that everything we thought we understood about the network is merely the beginning." She stood, her movements carrying new purpose and determination. The woman who had hidden herself away to protect others had been replaced by someone ready to take risks for a greater cause. "The archive has shown me something, Marcus. A way to turn the network's vulnerability into strength, to use the consortium's own hunting methods against them." Marcus felt hope and apprehension warring in his chest. "What kind of way?" "Lyra's." Markings settled into patterns of resolve and anticipation. "The kind that requires us to do something very dangerous and very stupid." "Such as, we're going to let them capture us." Marcus stared at Lyra, his mind reeling from her proposal. "You want to willingly walk into a consortium facility? That's not dangerous and stupid, that's suicidal. Not if we control the circumstances," Lyra replied, her markings shifting to patterns of calculation and strategy. "The archive showed me their weakness. They believe our network is simply biological telepathy, primitive communication between scattered minds. They have no understanding of what the archive truly represents." She began moving toward the facility's communications array, her crystal staff glowing with renewed purpose. "When they capture us, they will attempt to sever my connection to the network, to isolate me for study. But the moment they do, the archive will interpret their interference as an attack on the collective consciousness itself." Marcus felt understanding dawn like a cold sunrise. "And it will respond accordingly. Every Vel'nathi connected to the network will know instantly where we are being held, what the consortium is truly doing to our people. The scattered survivors will unite not in hiding, but in purpose." Within hours, they had transmitted their location to known consortium tracking stations, a calculated surrender that would bring the hunters directly to them. As the corporate ships descended through the energy storms of Ethros Prime, Marcus watched Lyra's markings settle into patterns of serene determination. "Are you ready to save my heart forever?" she asked, offering him her hand. Marcus took it without hesitation. "I thought that's what we just did." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.